Please, just keep to yourself tonight. Those were the first words my son, Daniel, said to me as he parked his luxury SUV outside the Grand Lakeside Lodge. He didn't greet me. He didn't ask if I was comfortable after the 3-hour drive. Instead, he turned around from the driver's seat and looked at me with the same strained expression he always wore whenever I was around, as if my presence alone was an inconvenience. Beside him, his wife, Rebecca, adjusted her pearl earrings and sighed dramatically. "Honestly," she said, "if you could avoid talking to people altogether, that would help everyone." I stared out the window and pretended not to hear. At 74 years old, I had learned that silence often cost less than arguing. The lodge buzzed with excitement. Families from across the state had gathered for the annual Hawthorne family reunion. Children chased each other across the lawn. Cousins hugged after years apart. Laughter drifted through the evening air. It looked like a celebration. For me, it felt like another performance. Daniel stepped out of the vehicle and immediately began checking his reflection in the window. Rebecca followed, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. Neither offered me a hand. I climbed out slowly on my own. "Remember," Daniel said, lowering his voice, "don't bring up old stories, don't talk about the house, and stay away from Aunt Margaret." At the mention of Margaret, my chest tightened. Margaret had been my closest friend for most of my life. After my husband passed away, she was the one person who repeatedly tried to stay in contact with me. But somehow every phone call became difficult. Every letter disappeared. Every visit was canceled before it happened. According to Daniel and Rebecca, Margaret was too busy. According to my instincts, something else was going on. Rebecca linked her arm through Daniel's. "She'll be fine," she said, with a dismissive smile. "People already know she gets confused." Confused. That word followed me everywhere. The announcement that Aunt Margaret had arrived spread through the lodge faster than any formal greeting. People respected her. Some admired her success. Others admired her honesty. But everyone knew one thing about Margaret Reed. She noticed things most people missed. As relatives gathered in the main hall, I saw her standing near the stone fireplace, speaking with a group of cousins. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and her calm confidence filled the room without effort. Daniel avoided looking at her. That alone told me something was wrong. "Aren't you going to say hello?" I asked quietly. His jaw tightened. "Later." Rebecca forced a laugh. "She'll be busy all night." But I noticed both of them watching Margaret constantly. Not the way people watch someone important, the way people watch a problem. The evening moved forward with speeches, photographs, and polite conversation. Breakfast and the first truth. I barely slept that night. The reunion lodge was quiet after midnight, but my thoughts were louder than ever. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's expression when I accepted Margaret's invitation. It wasn't anger. It was fear. For years, he had controlled nearly every part of my life, not with chains or locks, but with something far more effective: constant doubt. He convinced others I was forgetful. He convinced me that speaking up would only create trouble. Over time, silence became a habit. But habits can break. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the lake as I made my way toward the dining room. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the air. Families were already gathering around tables, laughing and planning the day's activities. Margaret sat alone near a window overlooking the water. She smiled when she saw me. "Good morning, Eleanor." "Good morning." For a few minutes, we spoke about simple things: The weather, old neighbors, childhood memories. It felt natural, comfortable, almost like the years between us had disappeared. Then Margaret leaned forward. Eleanor, I want you to answer one question honestly. My stomach tightened. All right. Are you happy living with Daniel and Rebecca? The question landed like a stone. For a moment, I considered giving the usual answer. Of course. They're very good to me. I'm lucky to have them. The same rehearsed lines I had repeated countless times. But something in Margaret's eyes stopped me. She wasn't looking for politeness. She was looking for the truth. No, I whispered. The word felt strange, heavy, powerful. Margaret didn't look surprised. She simply nodded. I thought so. I stared at my coffee. The cracks begin to show. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. The documents remained spread across the table between Margaret and me, their pages fluttering slightly in the breeze coming through the open dining room windows. My husband had always handled the family's finances, not because he didn't trust me, but because numbers came naturally to him. After he passed away, I was grieving, exhausted, and overwhelmed. Daniel had stepped in, promising to take care of everything. At the time, I had been grateful. Now, I wasn't sure what to believe. There must be a mistake, I said quietly. Margaret shook her head. I had an attorney review these records before I came here. My heart pounded. Why? She hesitated. Because something never felt right. I looked down at the highlighted pages. Properties, investment accounts, business assets, amounts far larger than anything Daniel had ever mentioned. For years, he had told me that Robert's medical expenses had drained most of the estate. Whenever I asked questions, he would sigh heavily and explain how expensive everything had been. I had believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. Margaret folded her hands. Eleanor, I need you to think. The truth finally speaks. By evening, the reunion's grand ballroom was filled to capacity. Round tables stretched across the room beneath crystal chandeliers. Relatives laughed, shared stories, and prepared for the final event of the weekend, the annual family address. Normally, I would have sat quietly in the back. Normally, I would have listened. Normally, I would have gone unnoticed. But nothing about this day felt normal anymore. Margaret sat beside me, calm and composed. The folder containing the estate records rested on the table between us. Across the room, Daniel and Rebecca looked increasingly nervous. They knew I had seen the documents. They knew Margaret knew the truth. What they didn't know was what I intended to do next. The program began with speeches from various family members. Applause echoed through the ballroom as stories of family history, perseverance, and integrity were shared. Integrity. The word lingered in my mind. After nearly an hour, the event coordinator approached the microphone. As always, she announced, we'd like to offer anyone the opportunity to share a few words before we conclude tonight's gathering. A few people politely declined. Others smiled and shook their heads. Then Margaret stood. The room immediately quieted. She walked to the stage and accepted the microphone. Thank you, she said. Her voice carried effortlessly through the ballroom. Tonight, I've been reminded how important family can be. The audience nodded. But I've also been reminded how dangerous silence can become. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Daniel stiffened. Rebecca looked toward the exits. Margaret continued. For years, many of us believed we knew the full story about someone we love. Her eyes found mine. And today, I learned we were wrong. The room grew still. Then she extended her hand toward me. Eleanor, would you join me? A life reclaimed. 3 months after the reunion, My life looked nothing like it had before. For the first few weeks, I kept expecting someone to tell me it was temporary, that I would wake up and find myself back in the cold little room behind Daniel's garage, that someone would take away my phone again, that someone would explain why I shouldn't ask questions. But those days never returned. Instead, each morning began with something I had almost forgotten existed. Choice. The letter I never expected since the reunion. The legal matters had been resolved. The estate was finally organized according to Robert's wishes. And most importantly, my life had settled into a peace I once thought impossible. The mornings were still my favorite. A cup of coffee on Margaret's porch, birdsong drifting through the garden. No fear, no shouting, no waiting for someone else's permission to exist.